our session. I will introduce myself. I'm Fyodor Kudryavtsov, head of the Laboratory for Urban Studies of the Moscow Institute of Architecture, who was preparing the session together with the directorate of the forum. We are looking for ways to develop new Moscow. This development started quite long ago, not yesterday. And the situation has dramatically changed once these territories were included legally into the city limits of Moscow. Of course, we have opportunities, but we have also risks. I will present to you our experts. I will start from that end of the table. Mr. Shan, Deputy Director of the Shanghai Urban Planning and Design Research Institute, China. Thank you. Martin Dubbeling, Vice President of Urban Planning Advisory Teams of the International Society of City and Regional Planners from the Netherlands. Dunham-Jones, IIA Professor, Coordinator School of Architecture of Georgia Institute of Technology, USA. Karima Nigmatulina, Acting Director of the State Unitary Enterprise, Project Institute of Moscow City Master Plan. Mr. Vladimir Zhidkin, head of the Department for the Development of New Areas of Moscow. Vladimir Yudintsev, head of the Arte Plus Architectural Bureau. Andrei Vasiliev, head of the Retail Estate Sector at Basic Element, and Alla Makhrova, Senior Research Fellow, Faculty of Geography of the Lomonosov Moscow State University. She holds PhD in Geography. I will focus on our regulations and the topics which we'll cover. We'll have 3 short speeches. That's our condition, that every speaker has time to share their ideas, and we'll have 2 short speeches by Mrs. Nigmatulina and Mr. Yudintsev, and we'll talk about the new areas of Moscow, what will happen there. We'll have several votings. We'll do it, of course, as we did that always. People will raise their hands and we'll see if there is any split in opinions, or if people are unanimous. We won't count the hands raised, of course, and then we'll have short inputs in the form of comments for questions and remarks. We'll analyze what direction will the development of Moscow take in the future, and we'll search for new or better model of development for Moscow, as the process will take not 2 or 3 years, but many decades ahead of us. I would like to ask one question from Mr. Zhidkin, who is the key person in our discussion today. Is the task of creating the new federal government center still present? So far, the final decision hasn't been made yet. No final decision has been made to create the federal center to place national authorities and regional authorities of Moscow. This issue is being discussed so far in the government of the Russian Federation, but the plot of land, 300 hectares, has been allocated for the administrative center with a total area of 3 million square meters. And in this territory, we will place an educational cluster and a healthcare cluster, and half of the new areas will be allocated for administrative and business center where federal authorities could be located. But our department, starting from next year, will be designing the new building on this territory with of 300,000 square meters. We'll have several city and municipal authorities in the territory. And so far, there are no distinct plans as to which government offices should be placed on that spot. To be short, the new territories will not be affected by this decision. So this task is not the main one, the principal one. It's one of the priority tasks, but it does not define the development of new territories any longer. So we'll have the first voting. I ask the audience to vote in a simple way. Just raise your hands. What's your opinion? Does the development of Moscow require an increase in the area of developed territories? If who thinks yes? Who thinks that it does require new developed territories, new housing, new buildings, new territories in? We're not talking about the whole agglomeration, whole city. We're talking about new territories, because new territories are the object of Moscow government management, the management for Moscow government. Do you think that the emergence of new developed territories in Moscow is necessary for the development of the city? Who thinks yes? There are three very courageous people who think that it's necessary, and who thinks no. No. So it's quite clear. It's quite obvious. Well, I'm asking of my colleague, Mrs. Druzhinina, to take a brief. Oh, you're willing to share something? I will ask my colleague, Olga Druzhinina, to present the short results of research on this territory to understand what's going on there and to see if the model of development has been formed. I'm sorry. So there are different options of development, and Moscow has unprecedented land resources for the modern major city. The area of our capital has grown 2.5 times. How should we manage that wealth? First of all, we should rethink it, and we should start to love it. The spatial structure of this territory is defined by the landscape, which are covered by forests and fields between the forests. The territory, which is free from forests, is occupied by 21% by houses. There are transport corridors which connects Moscow to south and southwestern parts of Russia. There are roads, there are villages, and there are small pieces of small towns, which can be used as an indicator of intensity of buildings. But it is not enough to have that indicator to evaluate the intensity of buildings. For example, for the village of Klenovskaya, 64 persons per hectare. It is equal to certain small cities in Russia. The social infrastructure, nevertheless, does not always match the intensity of the density. And Moscow is a big building site, construction site. The construction on these areas is huge, and the number of inhabitants of these territories will grow by no less than 750,000 people, approaching 1 million. The new working places are aimed at new trading centers, trade centers, and logistic facilities, whereas trade and offices will be concentrated around the airport of Vnukovo and around major highways. Of course, there's connection to towns and villages of the Soviet period now history, and so the basic unit of construction will be a small district, and the leading type of building will be multi-storied house of with many flats, blocks of flats. It will be the basic structure built on those areas. Well, the expectations of the prospective inhabitants is connected to the infrastructure, which defines the quality of life. Of course, there are many natural objects and favorable environmental conditions, and of course, the quality criteria are a bit lower than the expectations of the prospective residents. Does Moscow need such a model of such unurbanized so far territories, which leads to an uncontrolled growth of the city, which causes concerns as far as the quality of life? And Moscow authorities will have to deal with that enlargement of its territory, and it will have to control the new housing facilities. It will have to grow to increase the social and transportation infrastructure somehow. Nevertheless, world history of urbanization offers us several opportunities for developing new territories, both which for new Moscow means a choice between three scenarios. First of all, one option is to continue the Soviet-style city planning. This is a bit difficult due to the commercial aspect of housing, and it's not possible for the regional and municipal authorities to be accountable and functioning for the creation and functioning of engineering infrastructure and transportation infrastructure, which provides for the high quality of environment and which creates a high level of city comfort without segregation of urban community. Option number 2 is the urbanization of new territories. It is quite a new topic for Russia, and there's also a third option. We can create a new city at the near the city limits, which can lay the foundation for the new agglomeration core. Present situation leaves some place for new possibilities of development. Moscow can reject the recent stereotypes forever, and New Moscow needs an experiment, trial and error, by creating an institutional model of dwelling which matches the challenges of today's world. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I would like to ask our experts, what's your opinion? Is the direction of the development for these territories already defined, or are we at a point when we can choose between different options? Who would like to share their ideas first? Maybe Mrs. Makhrova. Well, I didn't expect that I would have to talk right now. Well, can you hear me? Well, I think that there are still opportunities for choice, but the corridor of opportunities so I can't get any closer to the microphone. Can you hear me? Well, I think that there are still opportunities for choice. We're still at a point at which we can choose between different options, but the corridor of opportunities is narrowing down, and the opportunities of developing new territories show that a certain mixed model will be chosen. First of all, southwestern direction is not very well developed. Still, there is seasonal population, which is twice as big as permanent population. But the trends of cottage and private housing are also affecting the situation, because the risks of building cottages in this region, new cottages, show that such Western type suburbs will not emerge here, are not likely to emerge here, and we're more likely to have mid-size houses, blocks of flats, and we see lots of square meters are being built in New Moscow and in around Moscow. It shows the trends which have been set. Thank you so much. So you think that we still can choose? Does anyone want to share their ideas as well? Mrs. Nigmatulina, it's your time. I would like to answer this question, to respond to the voting at the start of our voting, and I would like to say it right now. As far as whether Moscow does need this territory or not, when Moscow was when this territory was accrued to Moscow, the territory was chosen, which has least housing. But on July 1 of this year, there were licenses for construction for for big areas. But now we have about 20 million square meters of housing right there, and the territory did include half of 3 districts in Moscow region or Moscow Oblast, and it included 21 village and towns, and in every case we took into account the interests of local communities, local municipalities, but the transportation infrastructure was not linked together into a uniform structure, a coherent structure, and the least developed and the most ecologically, environmentally pure part of the Moscow region could be chaotically developed. This is also such an option. And today, we have a challenge to develop this territory equally in terms of transportation and engineering infrastructure. It could be developed in the best interests of the equal and uniform development of Moscow. This area creates new opportunities for Moscow in recreational areas, parks, projects, investment projects, which would be difficult to implement in old Moscow.
Thank you, Vladimir. So what is happening in the past? You are intending to change. Yes, I agree, and we are already changing in all the projects that were developed in the past and already improved. They are rechecked by us in terms of transport utilities, and we like also unite them into one single city environment. Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to our foreign experts. I'd like to point out that yesterday with Martin, Shan also visited these territories and we also had a look. My question is, what did you see? And my question is also for Alan, because we just gave you a general picture. The process that were happening there till now were unique, or do you find a lot of similar or known clear things what they also you faced in other countries? Where from you would like to take the microphone first? Martin, you're welcome.
This is now my sixth or seventh visit to the Russian Federation and Moscow in the last few years. I visited the outer rings and the periphery of Moscow several times already. Also, the visit of yesterday, I'm in the opinion that that area needs really serious planning. By urban designers, by landscape architects. There are so many valuable, interesting characteristics of this area, and it's very hard to make a clear vision for that area. But the very point is that planning and transformation, that needs time, needs authority, it needs a certain level of power. And I think that developing that area is not to be stopped anymore, although not everybody would like development in this area, as you could see in the voting in this room now. So it is not to be stopped, is unavoidable, because the necessary alternative and that is to find locations for 2 to 3 million inhabitants within the outer rings of Moscow by transformation of industrial sites, their elected military sites, all the residential area. There's no time for that. You need a lot of time, you need a lot of power, you need a lot of money to do that. But it is avoidable that you do both. So you do have to do serious planning in the new Moscow area, but you also have to do very serious planning in the existing Moscow area. You have to do it both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm from the U.S., and this is my first visit to Moscow, so I really don't know the territory, but I do know the conditions of sprawling suburban areas, which the U.S. Unfortunately has an awful lot of. And a couple of things really do concern me, that there is, I think, a concern that the area is going to end up with a lot of fragmented developments if you aren't very clear from the outset about prioritizing connectivity. Otherwise, it will become sprawl, and it really is at risk of doing that. So we can't predict the future, and anyone who has ever tried to build cities never knew exactly how big they were going to grow, how fast they were going to grow. When I am teaching my students, I often point to the example of, Manhattan. The grid of Manhattan was approved and laid out in 1811. They didn't know what cars were, they didn't know what high-rises were, but they laid out a street plan. Now, they didn't build the street all at that time, but they laid out a plan that said this is where all the streets will be. And that plan has been able to adjust to low density, high density. It's gone up and down. It's proved to be remarkably efficient. Now, I'm not suggesting you should just lay a grid on top of the whole territory by any stretch. But I am suggesting that precisely because you don't yet know really how fast the development, how much development, exactly where it's going to go, that I would really strongly recommend the need to lay out a master street plan that at least shows where, if the development is the street plan connects to those local places, the local settlements that are already there. It should be its own unique plan. I'm not saying a Manhattan grid. I'm just using that as an example, though, of how we never know the future, but we do have an obligation to, I think, the public sector needs to lay out the framework of the public realm of those streets and guarantee that connectivity so that as developers come in, they're plugging into a system that at least allows that system to grow in a way that will be interconnected, because that would be my greatest concern. Otherwise, you run the risk of losing all those great parks and all the great local spaces.
Очень коротко.
Can you say very short? What do you mean say lose? What does mean lose when you said? At the end, we can say that we can lose this territory. How can it look like? What does it mean to lose the territory?
Certainly, what we found, the experience of the U.S., we started suburbanizing right after World War II. So we've had 60 years of massive suburbanization, and we've really discovered a lot of unintended consequences that have come out of that. It turns out that when you're building it, you're allowing people to live at long distances. At this point in the U.S., most people who are in the sort of lower half of all incomes spend more of their income on transportation than they do on housing. And it's because we didn't design in that connectivity. We found that the suburbs are not as affordable as everyone thought they were going to be. We found that the traffic congestion is actually worse in the suburbs than it is in the cities, precisely because we didn't lay out a connected street plan. We found out that public health is surprisingly worse in the suburbs. People tend to live very sedentary lifestyles when they're living with complete dependence on the car. They're not, if they can't walk to transit, they can't walk in the streets. They're living in neighborhoods without sidewalks. In the U.S. now, we have an epidemic of obesity. 1/3 of adults are obese. It has doubled in the last 30 years. It has to do with what we're eating, but it also has an enormous amount to do with our development patterns, and that obesity is triggering then heart disease, all these other things. I mean, car crashes are the #1 cause of death of anyone under age 34, and that's happening in the suburbs where people are driving a lot. So these are all kind of, then there's all the damage to environmental health that I think everyone's pretty familiar with. But so the fear is that there's all sorts of good things that attract people to the suburban kind of lifestyle, of all that beautiful nature, all of the sort of the feeling that you're getting away from the old model, you're going to a new model. But that's what. There's those unintended consequences you can lose much of that. It's important to be aware.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting point of view, because we used to consider it this interconnectivity in figures, but you also talking about harm to the health or environment. I also would like to Shan to ask to comment, because yesterday when we were visiting the new territory, Martin said that the size was really Chinese, but probably the scale is also Chinese. So can you also share your Shanghai experience with us? Thank you.
各位好。首先能允许我用中文讲，因为我有翻译。我想用中文的话，我可能能够把自己的意思表达得更清楚。
Добрый день. Наверное, сначала позвольте мне
Good afternoon. I would like to thank first of all for giving me the floor, and I have got my own Chinese Russian translator, so I will speak Chinese and you will hear the translation into Russian and then into English. First of all, I would like to say that the territory is really huge, but is not similar to Shanghai because it has significant area forested and has very good environmental factors. I personally think that this new territory of an old city is something what is really required for Moscow because Moscow is developing, has a lack of resources. But the most important thing is how to look in the future, identify where the development will go in the near future. The territory is also big for the administration. It's a big challenge for the Moscow government. If I'm not mistaken, this territory is 2.5 times bigger than the old Moscow. How it can be developed in the best way? Because the old city is a circle, but now it gets a different shape. And I think the more important thing is the transportation. I think that the next planning should foresee how to use the territory in order to leave the maximum area for the further development. In Shanghai, we were developing the rail transport in the suburb. We also were developing the residential areas. I think the housing should be really different. Because when I came to Moscow for the first time, and I can see that the houses are very similar. In the suburb, I saw that you do have a lot of single family houses, but that there is a demand for this type of housing. And I also think you need to decrease the area for the residential purpose. But you need to leave more space for people in order they can feel more freedom. I think This territory can also accommodate an industrial zone. Because if you plan all the residential area without any economic factor, the people will have to travel for a long time to the jobs. It is quite a significant load for them. Nobody can predict the development for long term. However, I think we need to really think how we can construct and develop this territory in the best way. But I think that the Moscow government should need time and get focused on the old part of Moscow, because the old city is the core of the city. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is time to give the floor to Karina, because we were discussing the situation she's familiar very well with, and have to know how can we use the development of this territory, because there is a single opinion around among everyone of us. There is a model, what this model needs to be changed, and it we also really identified how this model will be changed, and now we can also find out what plans are available. Because I would like to start with an introduction. It was very interesting to listen to the expert, because this new extension of Moscow means that everything will be constructed and developed, because this area, new area, will also have the same construction style as the old mosque. It will be the great mistake, and nobody is gonna move this direction. But in terms of governance, this territory is governed by the Moscow governance, and Moscow can use its opportunities to develop this territory in order to make it more harmonized with the old Moscow. The new territory, which is bordering the old Moscow, can be planned more correct in terms of interconnectivity in order to set up the junctions and streets. Now, this is the concern for the Moscow government. This is an opportunity we have in order to answer the second question we discussed, and whether we do have any traffic junctions at the moment. We do have transport junctions at the moment. Our institute already developed the territorial grids for the Troitsk and Novomoskovsk. These are two small cities in a new Moscow. Why we decided to develop this new grids? Because we need to identify the transport veins. If we don't want to lose this transport corridors, because in terms of ideology, it was the main input data to develop these grids.
But parallel to that, we would like to develop on different issues, which I will cover right now. We have certain prerequisites, certain plans, but that should be fixed in the plan of Moscow and master plan of Moscow, and the territorial plans are quite a unique scheme, especially when we are talking about Troitsk and Novomoskovsk districts. Let's get down to business. Why are we doing that planning? What can that territory give us? It is a direction of economic activities and efficiency. The city has a budget, and the city has to plan its budget. And budget revenues come from working places. So we form economic activities, and it's possible. It's beneficial for the budget, and it's good for the enterprises which are not located in the territory of Moscow, and this can raise the economic activities in Moscow. Then we can develop the social services in Moscow. We have to think about social infrastructure in Moscow in the scale which matches the size of Moscow. And the third direction, which is unique and which is quite beneficial, our Chinese colleague has stressed that it's green territory. It's our forests, and these forests do not affect the quality of human life. So the location of such green spaces for people, we have several historical legacy pieces which can be integrated into tourist activities and recreational activities. We all understand that every year the number of tourists who come to Moscow is a small number. But why is Moscow worse than Paris? So this territory can be quite beneficial for the development of tourist and recreational potential. Here in this scheme, we tried to make this more clear. When we came to these schemes, we considered several development scenarios. First of all, we would like to make the suburbia of everything, uniform housing. It's not a suitable approach. This will lead to a transportation collapse. This will destroy the environmental aspect, and it's of dubious economic effect. The second option, we looked into a new city at a maximum distance from Moscow. We did reject it because if we develop additional satellite towns and cities, they should be as far from the center as possible. So the development of satellite cities is very important for the Central Federal District of Russia. And we rejected that approach as well. The approach we have chosen is to develop compact townships in the first belt of this territory. The first belt is more densely developed than all the others. Some prerequisites show that this the existing position of Moscow and Moscow region, we need to look at this in the context of Moscow region. And Moscow has 12 million people, and the Moscow region has 7 more. In Troitsk, we have 230,000 people, and including seasonal dwellers who live in their cottages there in the summer, it is closer to 400,000 people. And the increase of population in Moscow region is going on. When we're considering the forecast until 2030, we see that up to 4 million people can come to the Moscow region. Why have we considered this scenario? If people don't come, we won't have to build houses for them. But if we don't plan the region for potential influx of people, we won't cope with that. So we're talking about potential, about opportunities, and we looked at the increment of people of 4 million people. We wanted to drive those people to the new areas of Moscow, not the old Moscow, but the new Moscow, at least a share, a proportion of this population, which has been reflected by our Chinese colleagues. The final solution which we made will have 1.5 million newcomers to these territories. And the Novomoskovsky district is smaller than Troitsky, and the proportion are compatible in their size, are comparable. And when we consider the territory, one of the most important aspects was to consider every opportunity and every limitation on those territories. We see that very simple things like gas pipelines can impede our development, and the most important factors are the green forests of these territories. They are not national parks or national reserves. They should be fixed and not cut in the nearest future. It's our lungs. It's something which makes our life much better. Those territories were formed around the rivers, and the development around the rivers should be quite careful, because if we dwell around rivers, we'll lose our rivers. We should be careful with rivers. It was a very important point for us to consider. As far as cultural sites, heritage sites, we have several clusters and cultural objects which are located in the north of the new territories, and one in the center. The historic and cultural heritage is difficult to maintain when no one needs it. If we can integrate that into the use of people, then it can support those heritage sites in the proper state. 12 points of growth are present here. They have been mandated here, and they have been fixed in the plan. They are more fixed in the territory, which we call compact formations. The ideology of this territory was split between the compact and dispersed formations, and of course we will keep our forests. It's not about development, but about keeping and preservation. Of course, we have some potential lands, former agricultural lands, which should not develop very rapidly. We should retain them for the future. We should talk about compact formations. You could say that compact formations is typical of everyone. Moscow should go in that direction too. So when we have developed that, one of the important points were the forests, which we don't touch. It's a limitation. Then we have rivers, which we have to preserve as much as we can. And we have compact formations in these territories. If you see big buildings in some of the villages around these territories, so new buildings should not be very far from those existing blocks of flats. One important factor is the transportation infrastructure. We started to work on that. Our ideology was to discern all the territories for compact dwelling. Not all the territories had to be developed, and our task was to link those compact territories to the transportation network. When we look at the transportation network, we have many limitations. We don't want to cut our forests. We need to define where our corridors will take place. We should make detours around townships and villages and define transportation corridors. You can see them here. You can trust me, that's the assignment which we had to face. If we have crisscrosses of our arteries, this territory has quite good integrity. and what we call compact formations should be integral and integrated and compact, and the free territory which have a potential for compact development has been juxtaposed, and we found some of the points of overlapping, and those territories became the territories of development. All the other territories should develop slowly. We should slow down their development because the excessive development of them will destroy our territory. It's important to realize that Moscow is unique in a way. We're considering the development of subway in these territories. It will be a link to Moscow, and then there's a question: what's next? You cannot build a subway across all the area. It's too cost ineffective. Of course, the first belt will be covered by the subway. Otherwise, we'll use light rail transport or railless transport or other types of public transport which can carry large numbers of people. We are looking into those options. We should link all the infrastructure to railways. We have Kursk and Kiev railways. We see that there will be no railway around across the middle because Moscow has been developed in a certain way. So we need to link this territory to the existing railroads. So these are our visions of developing for the development of recreational and tourist areas with the objects of cultural heritage, where we expect very interesting projects for such a careful but economically efficient and effective development for the benefit of Muscovites. If you have questions, I will be happy to answer them. Thank you, Karima, Robert, and I thank you for such a concise presentation. I don't know how our interpreters do work, but that's my fault that it's so fast. Could I add something? No, not so far. Well, as for the questions, good afternoon once again to all the participants of today's seminar, today's roundtable. I will just add a short point. We talked about the new territories and main concepts for the development of new territories, which became part of the territorial scheme. Our building construction complex and the Master Plan Institute was there was an understanding of how to develop new territories, and our opinions luckily coincide with those of international experts. We can see many examples of how these territories should be developed, and we visit different cities and towns. We visited Hong Kong quite recently, and we discussed how this city should be developed, which is in many ways is like Moscow. The integrity of territory, the transportation infrastructure, railroad, metro, and public transport, buses, rail transport are important, and we're working on those aspects to balance the development of transport. There are two territories in Vnukovo, in Astafyevo, to develop the whole transportation infrastructure in Moscow. What's important, while we form the transport corridors, we are planning not until 2035, like the master plan, but until 2050. And this is the way which our Chinese colleagues did choose. When we talked to the Chinese city planners, they consider 20-25 years ahead of us. The experts mentioned creating new workplaces. First of all, we need to create workplaces next to residential areas, and over the past 1.5 years, not a single project was approved because they only had hospitals and houses, not shops and not industrial areas. We're motivating all the investors, all the developers to include workplaces into those new areas, which would provide for the needs of half the population of these districts in order to achieve the maximum level of pedestrian availability for 50% of the population in these districts. And next, the second component is the distribution of different types of workplaces around those territories, which would cater for the needs of Moscow. And the number of workplaces should be bigger than the amount of human resources, because people from adjacent territories of old Moscow, southwest of old Moscow, can travel to work in the new areas. And of course, this also affects satellite cities like Podolsk and others. And to decrease the workload on the transportation infrastructure, we need to create these opportunities for the people. As far as the environmental conditions are concerned, we need to preserve the parks, the forests, and we would like to create a comfortable environment for the people in those territories. And I will show 3 more slides from my presentation. Speaking about model of our development, our seminar and our roundtable was titled "The Model of Implementation for New Projects, New Areas of Moscow." And we were talking about growth points, and there's another layer aimed at the development of these territories. There's a concentric development pattern. This ellipse includes several growth points aimed at balancing the integrity, not just inside one point of growth, one growth hub. There are major environmental clusters which are planned here, different logistics objects, facilities, and there will be a major railroad junction here. We'll consider the projects from Europe and China aimed at building new real estate facilities. Will invite companies from Asia and Europe in this business platform.
We can see in terms of job creation for 2035, we also will create probably more than 1 million jobs. And our option is to create 800 jobs, and they will also deal with all the industries which are quite significant for the local economy, taking into account the national experience that we are studying now. And the next slide shows you an option for kind of a gutter, when we can also consider different industries in the A point, and when exclude some of the industries and leave the most optimal list of industries, and areas of occupation that can also give a maximum economic effect within the new territory of Moscow in the last slide devotes to a certain economic model of development. You can see the brown sector in the beginning. This is the of financing of utilities and transport infrastructure. Then we show the development of the infrastructure out of the incomes from the new territory. When the red line, this is the payoff for loans, and the green is the profitability from the new territory that can start since 2025. However, the optimistic forecast shows that it can also start giving us the first income. So thank you very much. Thank you, and I would like to use my right as a moderator. I'd like to ask you, Karima, and Vladimir, some questions, and I also would like to give you very short answers like yes or no. Then we can start discussions. We will also have some questions from the audience. Karima and Vladimir, how do you think the new Moscow will become in the future an alternative to what we're having now, or not? Yes or no? I think it's something new, what is not similar to the current Moscow. Just with one word, please. It will have a new high-quality environment. I can confirm it. Just with one word, please. It will new high-quality environment. And then another question. This new environment, these gigantic housing districts, will they be located or not? No, they won't be. If you're talking about the houses of with 17 or 25 levels, no, they won't appear there. Okay, thank you very much. Vladimir, now I'd like to give the floor to you. Vladimir standing next to me. As for the limitation for the number of levels of the houses, we already heard about it for many times, but my question is typically Russian. Who will actually keep it in hands, and how many levels do you think are optimal and you won't exceed it? We can also know you can reach a high density with the 4-floor houses, and actually Israel can also confirm it. The problem is not in the number of levels in a particular house. I think it's more rhetoric questions, and I probably understand your answer. Probably, what the density would be in a new Moscow? How many square meters per hectare? When you're talking about the number of levels, it should be also different from the dispersed communities. Let's talk about the compact communities because it's quite an acute topic to discuss. We plan that the maximum number of levels should be 10, and 10 levels for the 85% of the territory, and 14 levels for the rest of 15%. We also have requirements for the density that shouldn't be exceeded. These figures for density are, if we to talk about the micro districts, that are probably not really actual when we to consider this territory. That's why I would like to choose the figures I will take low. But if we look at this compact community, it shouldn't be more than 8. When talking about significant area, more than one micro district for about many hectares. But if we talk about a particular area, it shouldn't be more than 25 in terms of density. But when we really work on a detailed development plans, we need to keep the balance, and it is always a key factor here when you're talking about the housing and residential areas. The density is comparable, but here the ideology is we need to keep the balance between the residential industrial areas. So our ideology is we don't really split the districts into residential and industrial ones. We would like to have a multifunctional districts, and this multifunctional peculiarity is the balance we want to keep. In this case, we are talking about a compact community. We don't have any jobs, so we don't. It's not needed if you don't have any jobs. The idea is that you can walk till the place where you work. But as for the control, probably Vladimir, you can command it much better than me. The control is quite an important issue. If you're talking about control, but during the first stage, it will be the development of the territory development, and they will be also worked against the master plan, because we also have parameters. The Karima mentioned in her presentation. This is the first control stage when we will talk about this housing. And the document with the name of the title Master Plan will be the control document to monitor how the development is being done. Please be patient, because everybody would like to express. Karima, there is a question to you, because the master plan will be one of the controlling tools in this case. But my question is, in order to develop this new territory, because Moscow really extended by more than 2 times, the current planning system, including documentation, practice, and is it enough or not? Or do we need to create an absolutely new system, planning system? And it will be something what Ellen was talking about. We already had a plan, an investor plan, but we are not able to control everything. I will give you the answer in 2 directions. When I'm talking about the documents that are existing now, and there is really a lot to improve in the whole Russia. This is not a question of Moscow development. This is, if you look at the current document that existing now, that are really fixing the situation, and they were created in the past based on the Soviet approaches, but I think many will agree we require new tools. But if we talking about Troitsk or Novomoskov, I would like to say it is quite important to think about economic mechanisms that can also stimulate the development of economic mechanisms in a way we would like to see there. If we just put ourselves into the role of employer and say, let's create new jobs, many people will ask you why. And in order to think out the economic mechanism that can really motivate these employers to create the jobs there, this is the potential for us. Thank you. But now it's time for our audience to express an opinion. Now time for questions. Please raise your hands and ask a question into the microphone. We've got 2 questions in this part. You have around 30 seconds. You can hear me. Karima, 3 simple questions. Do you have a transport grid? This grid is also environmental free. Do you have, third question, did anyone calculate any environmental or sanitary risks or planning risks? Because this is a planning which is quite acute. As for the environment, I have been living there for many years. This territory is not really good. But in order to implement these grids you were talking about, we need to think really deep about it. And the first presentation from Druzhinina was very interesting because this decision was taken. But we need to create really not only grids but also traffic junctions. We shouldn't go with the rails we have because Greater Moscow, it's a region. We shouldn't consider these issues separately. We need to renovate old and new Moscow. Karima, can you answer this question? As for the topic of a real city, and when we were developing the schemes and grids, we were considering the whole city, the old and new Moscow. So the territorial plan is fixed for this part of the city, and I will also give you an answer on our transport grids. We already developed the transport grids and also considered different alternative scenarios. And certainly the transport scenario is also connected with the residential development scenario. So I'd like to underline that all the results were also modeled. It's not something we draw, but we calculated everything in many operations, how the transport grid can develop and how we can also develop the residential and industrial areas too. As for the environmental protection, we can say we have experts from our institutes, probably Mrs. Lebedeva, which is heading our mass workshop working with this topic. If you have more detailed questions, she will answer you. Please answer. As for the risks, I can tell you it is clear because the current plan is a delicate balance of different parameters, and the main obstacle is how to implement this plan. And the question we already discussed, who will monitor and control it, because this is very important, because all other risks, for example, environmental risks, they were taken into account in the implementation. This is the maximum risk. First of all, I would like to say we have 16 minutes till the end of our seminar. In your limit of 30 minutes, please don't lose your time. The extension of Moscow is a very significant extension and these solutions should be taken when there is a strategy which identifies why it was needed. Moscow has already very significant problems, for example, the traffic problem. The second one is a disbalance between the residential and job locations. There are significant problems here. If the new territory really resolves these problems, this is very good. And I really thank Mr. Moderator because he started with the poll and the voting, because the audience doesn't think that it's not really needed for the Muscovites in Moscow. It is a really thing we don't really need to do. It was really worth to adopt a strategy for the Moscow development, and this strategy should foresee a number of documents. For example, we can also put a question on changing on the Moscow extension and do it in the right way. And it was done not by Karima or Vladimir. We had official polls. In this case, we didn't have any official polls. Can you also make a conclusion? That's why the population didn't take any part in this extension. Thank you very much for your opinion. Many people can share your opinion. I think that we have to get focused on what we have to do. We can understand we have different opinions because we cannot go back to the past. So I would like you to answer the questions. Did I understand you right, Karima, that one of the main tasks for the new territory is to accommodate these 4 million people? Not all the 4 million people. When I'm talking about 4 million, it is quite important to understand this is people in the Moscow region, because some people come to the Moscow region or to Moscow, and when we analyzed the data, we thought that we can probably accommodate these 4 million people, but we don't really want to accommodate them in new territory, because Moscow is much more attractive for many people than the Moscow region. If you can attract those who come to Moscow and would like to be in Moscow, for them it would be possible to be located in the new Moscow. But no, don't really intend to accommodate all these 4 million comers to Moscow. How can the development of the new Moscow influence the development of the old Moscow? I will give an answer. Initially, when this solution was made, we were talking not about locating the federal center in New Moscow, but we can also wanted to resolve the problems of the neighboring territories of the old Moscow. We also wanted to change the traffic direction when everybody in the morning goes to Moscow and in the evening backwards. We really think that up to 150,000 people can move from the old Moscow to the jobs in the new Moscow. In this case, we can decrease the transport load. This is one thing. As for the federal center, I already said about it. We can certainly also talk about other parameters. We're talking about the parks, some production that can be located, some investment projects in the new Moscow, what is not possible to do in the old one due to the number of reasons. And this is how some of the problems can be resolved. And I'm talking about the future development of the whole Moscow. Thank you very much. I'd like to clarify one thing. We'd like to go back to the experts. Karima, I would like to ask you one small question. In this compact nodes, you would have a new typology with a quite high density in particular areas, up to 25,000, even higher. No, 25,000 is the maximum. So you need a high density with a multifunction purpose. I would like to clarify one thing which would be quite useful. How much area we'd like to use for these compact communities. We can look at this territory. It is 145,000 hectares, and 5,000 hectares will be used for these compact communities. It is not gigantic areas. It's quite important to underline. When we were identifying these compact communities, we were searching where they can be located, and we didn't want them to build around the whole territory, because the ideology of this oil sport is not used here, because we didn't want to create a second LA and compact communities. This is something what can save the territory. You can say this community is a compact and it is spurs, and the spurs communities, it is not a suburb. As for this spurs communities, we will probably identify more when developing the master plan, because we understood for ourselves that our aim to develop the territory, because this actually pressure to house was quite significant. We wanted to identify where we can develop, and we also wanted to keep the environment in the other areas, and a more detailed identification of what is going to be in this dispersed territories is something what is not identified yet, but it was quite important for us to identify where we can do and where we need to break. One more question. So in the nearest future, we have quite a lot of agriculture areas. What we're going to do with them?
We have 3 clusters which have been marked as 12 growth points. Number 10, 3 territories which are covered by agriculture, and that's how they are used today. And we think they shouldn't be developed. If it's possible to develop agriculture in the territory of Moscow, if it's feasible, we should look into that. And before the decision is made, we should wait with those territories. Let's add, we talked about the 3 federal unitary enterprises which are located at the near the city limits. We have lots of hectares in the property of many legal law companies, and most of them have land in their possession, and most of this territory will be covered by the infrastructure, and the whole transfer of those land plots will be performed through the payment to the city of Moscow. And this transfer from one category to another one did entail a fee to the budget of Moscow. I would like to ask Mr. Andrei Vasiliev, as we have a picture of dramatic changes. A lot needs to be used. We need to use the same terminology which was used. Impede or wait or think about this. New typology has to be developed, and the fate of the area is not yet clear. So I would like to ask Andrei Vasiliev if the market is prepared, the market which has adjusted this system and set the system up. Is it prepared for radical changes? What's necessary for that, and when can these radical changes happen? Good evening. As someone who represents the business and the developers who have large plots of land, we face different challenges for us and several issues which our developers and city planners respond to. The first thing we're facing is that the nearest belt of Moscow is inhabited by the people who are looking for high class appropriate housing. There's no more housing in Moscow, so people move to the outskirts of Moscow. We don't have any limits in planning, so we received the territories which we received, and this made it possible for the developers to earn money on that. If we're talking about development, the growth comes from the number of working places. We plan to create different additional working places, and it's not clear what stimuli will be in place for new working places in this territory, because some stimuli should be in place, and mostly economic stimuli. This is one question. Another question is that along with economy and working places, people need to have other things for comfortable life. It's a question of education, culture, and social infrastructure. If the program aimed at the development of those components in the Moscow region, the territories in the United States received a big boost after the construction of campuses or universities. These are two questions to our representatives of our authorities. I think that, and the second part of my question, our conference gives us a unique opportunity to talk to experts from other markets, much more developed. How did they create a comfortable environment in new territories? Thank you. I think that our session is almost over. We'll go over to the final conclusive part. We'll start from our foreign colleagues, international colleagues. We'll ask what's important for them, what they think is important. Andrei, I will be brief. I'll answer the question which was asked. As for the campuses, it's medical cluster, educational cluster, and research cluster. As for the stimuli for the placement of working places, we should take into account the interests of businesses and all those of the city. Of course, it's always more beneficial to build housing without working places. Here, we have to take into account the interests of the city and of the businesses. We capitalize our territory and make it more interesting for the buyers of your real estate. I would like to get back to our question, and the question will be quite specific. Is our development business prepared for rejecting the traditional model of development? Is it possible? Yes, of course. Traditional methods are no longer valid. Can you? Yes, of course we can. Of course we can. And most people will support that. Everyone wants a comfortable environment. So what prevents you then from that? Well, traffic does prevent us. This transportation problem is the main one. The developer can create an office center, but there's no certainty as to what demand will be for it. But transportation infrastructure cannot be resolved by one single investor. As far as the type of dwelling is concerned, does it also affect the type of dwelling? If we look at Moscow region, there are different other types of dwellings. It's just the start. It's just the initial phase. One project 1 year ago, we offered the investor to we suggested that the investor creates new workplaces, but no one would be interested in that. But after 1 year, the same investor is offering us 10 types of different working places in the same territory, after having worked with the employers who are interested in placing objects in this territory, in this housing territory. So the preparedness doesn't come from scratch. It is necessary to develop a new city, and the investors need to look for partners or companions which would help them create new working places. Thank you so much. We're out of our time limit, so let's start. I see hands from the audience. Okay. We'll accept 2 questions, 2 short questions. I see you. Okay. 2 short questions. Here and here. we are outside our time frame. The Swedish company, we have done lots of consulting, including Moscow. My question is simple. The government of Moscow is trying to develop a new localization program for clusters. In Moscow region, this is not yet developed, so everyone will pull the blanket on themselves. So how much integrated will be those programs in Moscow and Moscow region, because these programs do not overlap. We have a joint coordination council between Moscow and Moscow region where we discuss joint planning issues, adjacent regions, transportation, infrastructure planning, campuses, and centers. So it will be a segment in favor of the Moscow region. So we're not talking about this, about rejecting something. Joint cooperation will take place. It will define the creation of campuses or industrial districts. The second question, and that's all. We can't have another question. Just one more. My question is quite short, but a global one. I would like to ask. About the new standards in city planning, which will reflect the city planning policies of Moscow. How will this be connected to federal standards? What's the procedure? It's not a simple question. It interests everyone. Everyone is building new housing according to some rules, but no one knows these rules. Well, I will answer. I will probably give a weak answer. Moscow Committee of Architecture does develop the standards for dwelling in Moscow, and a different structure is in charge of it, so it's difficult for me to comment on its contents. These standards have been developed in view of the new territories, and we've been working quite actively with our colleagues on these concepts of disperse structures in Moscow, and new territories were connected to Moscow, and the standards which were active in Moscow cannot be used for the new districts of Moscow, and thus this work was initiated, and we can get comments from the Moscow Committee of Architecture. They can give you more information, and new standards for Moscow are being developed, and Moscow will initiate changes into the federal standards. It's important to link together the regional and nationwide standards. Let's get to the most final part of our discussion. I'll ask all the experts to please, panelists, if you think you have to add something, but let's listen to other experts to express what's the most important thing in their speeches, what their suggestions are for this territory, what should be developed here. Please be short if possible. Maybe we start from Shan. I learned it from our managers that we've made giant steps towards the development of this region. What I just shared with you, I won't repeat this. I will just emphasize one thing. In fact, for the city of Shanghai, the business sector played a crucial role for the development of Shanghai. within the 15 past years, the capital sector did develop, and we did pay little attention to other areas. Moscow should consider even a more distant perspective. We need to develop not only the capital sector, but other infrastructure areas, in innovative areas like the internet. These advanced technologies and their development for the city should play a bigger role for the management of the city. Thank you.
Мартин, пожалуйста.
Listening to all the comments and the ideas about this area, I would like to stress that it's very much important that there is one planning authority in charge of this region. One planning authority and not 21 districts or whatever. And I think that that planning authority should have a much more crystal clear strategy why and how to develop this area. What you hear in the discussion, it's not clear. It's not obvious why you go into that direction and why you need it for. 4 million inhabitants, new inhabitants, not only that region, but for all Moscow, that was explained. But an example of a crystal clear strategy could be that you use that area to make sure that you that planning authority makes a lot of money because there's a lot of money to be earned in that area by developing. That planning authority earns a lot of money, and it will be invested in transforming, intensifying Moscow, like Hong Kong, where you probably have been. Or that area could be used for outplacing industries or outplacing other facilities from Moscow in order to make place for new residential area within the rings of Moscow. So that crystal clear strategy is not it's not on the table. And I would advise you to, although there is a master plan, although you have ideas, it's not a bad idea, I think, to redevelop a crystal clear strategy why and how. And communicate that with the public and the Moscow people. That's in the basic what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Polycentricity is obviously really important for Moscow to be able to relieve the traffic congestion. There need to be more job centers that are dispersed throughout this region. And I certainly agree, compact development is the way to go. You need nodes that are connected through transit. Completely agree. I wish I saw also a more clear phasing strategy, and probably, it would be a great idea to have a pilot project where you really demonstrate the best of the best kind of intentions of everything that you're trying to accomplish, and measure how well it performs in the economy, in preserving the environment, in terms of public health. Does it get really reduced traffic, and can you then resize some of those transportation corridors because you are getting in the mixed use is going to be is relatively new idea for Moscow. You need to test it and see how it performs here, and does it allow you to actually then kind of adjust your standards for transportation and buildings. I mean, I think the priorities, Karima, that you set out are extremely important, but I am still concerned. If the federal government does not serve as the catalyst for job creation, if they're not moving, would be quite worried about what is the catalyst for that job creation. And I find myself still asking myself, I suspect that the economic, the social, and the environmental goals might be met with greater impact on the Moscow population and at less cost by redeveloping the industrial areas and some of the aging Khrushchevkoye inside Old Moscow rather than going outside the ring. We just need to still sort of see whether the catalyst's really there or not.
But very short, please.
Yeah. And to stress the opinion of my colleague, I would add that the new Moscow is that a proof that Moscow is doing very well planning, or is it the proof that Moscow is incapable of planning at all for its whole city? I think you should go to mixed use. I think you should go for transformation. But what is the role of the new Moscow area in that? And that must be part of your strategy.
Mm-hmm.
We can also give the floor to you, because I would like to be brief, because I have a conceptual proposal, and I also heard a lot of proposals from the Planning Institute of Moscow, from the Department of New Territory. This I think is very good, but I'm really confused with the realities that are happening. We have quite a number of correct facilities with the creation of new jobs, but in terms of area, it is something what can only increase the amount of functional peculiarity. It is quite difficult to eliminate these traffic conjunctions. And I think the lack of this transport infrastructure will be main block for development in this new territory, especially because they really look at the kind of tie that really stops the development of this Moscow agglomeration, and the lack of the government will also break the development of Moscow and new Moscow. Andrei, you're welcome. What is important for the business? What do you think is important? It's quite difficult to add. I think there was very good comments from our foreign experts. The strategy is right. I would like to more exact information. I would like to have a good phasing, and if phase one should be also done today. And the developers already agreed with different businesses to create new jobs, and the government should support this project in order to make it also kind of an incentive for other developers. Thank you, Vladimir. Your name. I think this is the doubling of Moscow area led us to see different to the transport infrastructure, because I'd like to remind you that Moscow is in terms of density behind all the capitals in Europe and even in Asia. As for the density of the streets, we have four times less or 5 times less, or even the figures are quite significant. These are figures from the Planning Institute of the Moscow region. I really understand that the Institute of the Moscow Master Plan should be quite cautious in terms of development of the transport infrastructure, because even here in the audience we may have some the active people, activists who can be really act against the governmental initiatives. But I think that this extension will also allow us to use the so-called parallel grid, so we don't the first transport extensions are made within the existing streets. It won't resolve the situation, but we need to create a parallel grid system of the streets. It is quite a normal fact everywhere in the world. Probably they have less parks and forests, and less they such activists like in Himki were protecting their forest. I would like to ask Karima and Vladimir to say final words. It's a pity that we limited in time today, because the topic we started discussing today has certainly a lot of information. As for the phasing, we have proposals for phasing. We also understand that what is going to happen within the next 3 years and in the up 3 years after the first 3 years. So we have also some forecasts until 2020, and the Moscow government is considering them. Phasing was taken into account. When the final decision is made, it will be also announced publicly. However, we really consider these topics. We also had all the transport calculations where we can do what we can do right now and where we do additional efforts. This information is available. As for the transportation, if you look at it, there's more detail. We do have some transport corridors laying in parallel to the existing ones. And certainly you just need to get more familiar with our proposals. But what I would like to conclude, implementation, that's the most important issue, and this topic requires additional development, and also on the legislative level. In Moscow, we have an implementation plan which also develops for each plan. It is also need to improve every city development document. But what obligations this implementation plan has is this part is not very well developed. When I was talking about the fact that our city development legislation needs to be improved, this is something what is we're missing. It is missing in our job in developing Detroit, Kanova, Moscow, because if we have a territorial grid until 2035, but we understand that we don't need to construct everything at once, and this phasing is really important here. And I would like to address to our foreign experts. I would like to say we're really always happy to welcome your experience in developing our master plan. We already get consultancy from our foreign experts, because their experience in this area, especially in phasing, is very useful for us. We have one big advantage when we take decisions in developing the new Moscow and the whole Moscow, the greater Moscow. It is that we are facing development of big mega cities in the world, and they already took into account all the mistakes also from other big cities, and our advantage is that we can use the international experience, and we will take it into consideration. And as Karima said, we also will attract international experts who will visit mega cities in order to take into account all the mistakes made, and also know to understand all the development methods, how the mega cities can grow and develop. So we really rely on the support on our international experts. Thank you very much. In the end, I would like to make another poll in the audience. Please answer the following question, taking into account all the comments, opinions, assessments, risk analysis you heard today. The question is, the development of these new territories is for Moscow and Muscovites an opportunity, or is a mistake? Who does think that the development of new territories is an opportunity? Please raise your hands. And who think that is a mistake? And I think probably we need 1 more hour to persuade the rest, but I will be really punished and tortured for exceeding the time limit for more than 20 minutes. But I think that this session was really useful for you in our audience, which is also represents Moscow and Muscovites, and our audience saw opportunities, and these opportunities are available. This is an optimistical idea that I would like to finish our roundtable. Thank you.
Искренне я тебе аплодировал тоже.